tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
It was a typical day. Once the warm-up exercises of driving, flying, and a few light scraps with the police were complete, Roderick, better known as Thrash in his professional circles, was ready to begin his day in earnest. It would start with a little bit of armed robbery, followed by a car chase that would rival even the most extravagant of such found in action movies. After that, some lunch, followed by a contract killing, carried out in his signature style of overwhelming fire and general mayhem. Once his criminal impulses were sated, the real fun would begin. A newly acquired firebomb had recently come into his possession, which was said to coat all in its blast radius with a thick and viscous petrochemical before igniting the scene in a whirlwind of slow and fiery agony. Those days victims of his new toy, all of whom had been absolute strangers to Thrash, didn't die easily or quickly. Rather, they died slow, screaming in torment as the heat and flames lapped their bodies, cooking them inside out. Setting them alight along a public sidewalk as they idly went about their days, Thrash relished the chance to be a pox upon the people of this city whenever possible. Normally, happy to carry out such with run-of-the-mill mass shootings or with the unforgiving force of whatever car or truck or piece of construction equipment he had happened to steal the moment before, this new torturous device was a delight to his dark and debased instincts. He was not alone in enjoying such cruel delights either, as countless throngs of his thousands, if not tens of thousands of loyal followers, likewise cackled maniacally and rewarded Thrash generously as these innocent strangers were put to the torch. After this, though, as with any workday, it was time to wind down, which for Thrash involved a more intimate approach to violence and brutality, with the abduction and slow torture of one last random denizen of the city. Drawing these end-of-the-day mutilations out as long as he could, his recent acquisitions of some medical equipment allowed him to implement IV drips, tourniquets, and adrenaline shots to keep his victims not only alive, but awake, as he sliced from them their eyelids, removed fingers, toes, and noses, and usually towards the end, removal and examination of organs. It was a dirty business, a bloody business, and a business which Thrash and his people found endlessly entertaining. As usual, casual banter and color commentary was provided by Thrash as he carried out his acts of merciless brutality, oftentimes enhancing the joy his people felt as they watched his demented artistry unfold live before their eyes. It was upon a final cut then, as his most recent victim expired, that Thrash decided perhaps his day's work was done. He addressed his people thusly. "Okay, well, Thanks everyone for joining me today. That was certainly a lot of fun. Special thanks to Ezekiel2517, Marshall Smathers, Vinvu55, Mary Cat, and Larry Kubiak for their generous donations. As always, if you enjoyed the stream, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment down below if you want to see me try out some other games or just have some new ideas for this one. As always, I'm Thrash, your resident game psycho. And don't forget, I'll be at the Atlanta VRCon tomorrow if you wanted to stop by and say hey. Otherwise, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and I'll see you next time. And so, with the final click of a button on his handset, Thrash, Roderick, ended the stream and exited the game. Pulling off his VR headset, he blinked a few times as his eyes and brain readjusted to the meat space reality he shared with his ever-growing list of subscribers. It had been a profitable afternoon, with donations and subscriptions to his channel totaling roughly $1,000. Not by any means a paltry sum, yet one which Roderick regarded as mediocre, as his own insatiable lust for growth never quite allowed him to feel content with the notable success he was already enjoying. Sitting down to his computer, he went about his obsessive routine of checking the stream stats, numbers of new and departing subscribers, and his overall revenue projections, pleased to see at least his growth was consistent and sustained. He had been a professional game streamer for most of his very short adult life. First finding success on the streaming platform Glitch at the age of 16, he quickly became a mainstay of the online gaming world, rising to well over 5 million regular subscribers, and counting by the age of 22. Like all content creators who find success, Roderick discovered a niche which he filled nicely in the world of online gaming. That niche was savagery. No game could be too violent, too gory, nor too encouraging of bloody cruelty towards hapless non-player characters for Thrash. It was his bread and bloody butter. His affinity for the darker side of gaming even brought him before Congress once to testify against a proposed bill that would regulate the sorts of violent and adult content that game studios were increasingly making. This was, of course, thanks to his status as something of a notable celebrity in the world of gaming, and in his earnest defense of the viscera-strewn games he loved and made a living playing, his own notoriety grew from there. The debate was sparked initially by the release of Roderick's favorite game, Felonium 4. Generally regarded both lovingly by fans and scornfully by detractors as an open-world murder simulator, Roderick was himself instrumental in ensuring the platform Glitch reversed a decision to ban streams of the game, leveraging his multi-million subscriber count with a threat to sign with a different website. Once successful in this, the game studio, Pariah Games, showered him with every update, mod, and piece of downloadable content they had. When Felonium 5 was released for virtual reality, utilizing the latest in both haptic feedback technology and advanced artificial intelligence to drive the non-player characters along, Roderick, Thrash, was among the very first to indulge in it. His celebrity status being itself a marketing slam dunk, as the company was more than eager to provide him with an early release, discovering both studio and user-made mods in short time after the public release for such things as decapitations, disembowelment, abduction, and torture. The name of Thrash quickly became one that was inexorably synonymous with utter carnage. The holiday season was upon him, and as such, every game studio, console, or gaming PC company sought to ensure their products went right into the hands of Glitch's biggest streamers. As part of this, Roderick was booked to debut the newest interactive gaming technology, the Void Runner VR system by Xenosware. Boasting the most immersive gaming experience in history, Roderick was looking forward not so much to the event, where he would introduce the product on stage, but getting it home and really exploring what it had to offer. It was while looking over proposed specifications online that a message popped up in his feed. It was from Troy, also known as Bandersmash, a fellow friend and streamer. "You psyched for tomorrow?" the message asked. Roderick physically shrugged, as though the screen could transmit his wordless answer. "Yeah, should be fun," Roderick replied. He was, in point of fact, rather dreading the meet and greet portion where he'd be sat at a table, signing various objects and posing for selfies. He had always had a strange relationship with fame, one of equal parts entitlement and the kind of growing sense of elitism common among the young when thrust into the limelight so relatively quickly. "I take it you'll be at the after party?" Troy asked. "You bet your ass I will. Gonna try and fuck serendipity," typed Roderick. "Hot top titty streamer, nice," Troy responded with a series of suggestive emojis. From there, Roderick went about double-checking on his VIP pass confirmation, looked over his emails, and died a little inside whenever deigning to look at his ailing crypto portfolio. Cursing a bit, first the market and then himself, he cringed at the thought that he could have ever been so stupid as to think a currency brandished with a hedgehog as its mascot was a wise investment strategy. Still, though, a quick look at his bank balance and subscriber numbers brought him out of his momentary malaise and gave him just the exact sort of dopamine rush he'd come to survive upon. Rising from his seat, after some hour or so of idle doom scrolling through his social media feeds, Roderick entered the kitchen. It was, as the rest of his condo, palatial in its size and luxurious in its facilities. Opening the massive stainless steel refrigerator, he pulled from within a bottle of Bro Fuel, a supposedly organic and supposedly healthy supposed energy drink, with whose company he had enjoyed a bountiful sponsorship. Though he enjoyed the flavor, he never really felt much in the way of an energy boost to speak of. Popping the top, he took a long pull from the can before shuffling into his living room and slumping lazily onto his broad leather sofa. Turning on his massive television with a tap of his phone, he scrolled about, looking for a video or movie to enjoy. He had neither cable nor satellite, as such were the province of boomers, and as such beneath him entirely. He paused for a moment, considering an online series billed as a dark comedy poking fun at the superhero genre. The tagline for the series was, "No one moron should have all that power." This gave him a slight smirk, and thus hoping the first of what were then 5 chapters might prove entertaining, settled in for what turned out to be an audiobook presentation with a still image on screen. Finishing the drink, he laid back on his luxurious sofa as the dulcet tone of the video's narrator read the story aloud. Soon, he felt his eyes begin to droop, and as is often the case with audiobooks in the evening, he was soon put fast asleep. The following morning he rose, stiff from a night on the couch. After a shower and a shave, which despite being in his early 20s was still more ritual than necessary as he grew little to nothing in the way of a beard, he tucked into a breakfast bar and began preparing for the convention. He'd been debating which outfit he ought to wear, accounting the brand names and his relationships with them, versus his instinct to simply wear his own merchandise. In the end, deciding to keep things in-house, he donned the grossly overpriced combination of sweatpants and hoodie, upon which the words "Thrash Trash" were brilliantly emblazoned, and summoned his rideshare. The UberX arrived in next to no time, and though part of him wished to take one of his many cars out and drive himself, he knew in all likelihood he'd be spending the evening drinking. Once more, this foresight was less a matter of genuine personal responsibility and more one of what such could do to his image, especially given the average age of his fans being between 14 and 30. Roderick, if pressed, would generally mistake being self-absorbed with being self-aware, but as most of whom he would regard as his peers were much the same, the reality of such never truly sunk in. The ride was a pleasant one, making his way from his home in the suburbs of Atlanta into the heart of downtown with surprisingly little traffic. The sun shone brightly, and the day was, as usual, a warm one. As the car rounded the final turn before arriving at the large hotel and function hall the convention was being staged at, Roderick looked closely along the standing lines of attendees. Amidst the variety of cosplay costumes and industry logos, he scanned closely, looking for signs of his own label. But before he could register any entirely, the car had entered the parking structure that was home to the service entrance he would be taking for his ingress. Met by a convention staffer with an earpiece in the ear, he was welcomed warmly and ushered to the VIP waiting area, where he would be showered with promotional gifts from vendors and be made to mingle with other high-level streamers. Amidst the clusters of conversations, Roderick watched as one plastic smile and obligatory glad hand between people he knew hated each other took place. After taking the first of several gift bags on offer, he smiled as his friend Troy approached. "What up, Trash?" Troy bellowed excitedly. He was a tall and heavier-set man with sandy blonde hair and a barely visible goatee. He was, as Roderick was, decked out from head to toe in his own gaudy merchandise. "What's good, Snatch?" Roderick replied, relieved to see at least one face he was genuinely friendly with. The two shook hands and together surveyed the room some more. "So, Don Kestrel and Sly Guy won't shut up about the new Man in the High Tower game. I mean, I played it, and it was alright, I guess. I guess it was based on some book written by a guy named Dick," said Troy. "Didn't they have a TV show a while back?" "Yeah, I think so. Anyway, weird fucking game, man. Kind of thing you need to be in the right headspace for, you know?" Troy continued. "I just wish I could grow my channel some more. I think we could maybe do some more collabs. I bet that'd help me out a lot." Roderick continued listening passively, affording a slight grunt of acknowledgement that Troy had said something while not really listening at all. This was until something, or rather someone, caught his attention. Patting Troy with his hand, his eyes never left her. Wordlessly, he nodded in her direction, signaling for his friend to see why he stopped her mid-sentence. "Ah, look, serendipity," Troy said with a smirk. "There she is," Roderick replied, his eyes peeled on the tall, impossibly beautiful blonde streamer who stood speaking casually with a couple of men in suits. "You could almost say it's..." "Don't," Roderick said, cutting Troy off. "Serendipitous," he continued, after a pause just long enough to make Roderick roll his eyes and groan. "So, when are you going to make your move?" "After the party, naturally. Maybe we'll chat and share an Uber, and whoops, we're back at my place. She comes up for a drink, and then it's all, easy peasy titty squeezy, you know?" Roderick said with a haughty sense of self-assurance. Soon after, a bit more idle mingling, a staffer from the event approached. "Hi, Thrash," she said. She was a petite young woman with dark black hair bound neatly in a ponytail. "They're almost ready for you in Function Hall 2, if you'll just come with me." "Sure thing," Roderick replied, following her lead as she turned and began setting off down the hall. Preparations had been completed well in advance of his arrival, which, though suiting him, was regarded still by the organizers as moderately late. Entering the function hall, Roderick looked over the proverbial ocean of filled seats, with gamers and enthusiasts and press all contributing to the low cacophony of patient chatter. Still following the staffer and taking a moment to admire her small frame and shapely posterior, Roderick was led down beside the side of the main stage, upon which two chairs along with a display table rested. At the center of the table, and spread neatly along its surface, he finally observed the new generation VR gaming system he was invited to introduce, the Void Runner. It, for the most part, resembled any other gaming headset, save for where most were akin to goggles strapped around the head. This appeared to be more like a full helmet. Whereas many of the newer technologies in the realm of VR gaming had to do with haptic feedback suits and gear that would allow players to enjoy physical stimuli while in their game, this helmet unit was almost scaled down in that it didn't even appear to have the standard controllers of most other units. Roderick was brought further back into an area behind a small curtain, behind which he found a short stairway up to the main stage. The staffer paused before checking the small tablet computer upon which was displayed its schedule. She motioned to Roderick, handing him an earpiece and microphone. He slipped it into his ear as the staffer clipped the transponder to the back of his belt. "So first, Mr. Newman will speak for a few moments before introducing you, so if you would just please wait here, the event will be starting momentarily," she said, to which Roderick merely nodded. As she stepped away to attend to other duties, his shameless ogling continued right up until she was out of eyeshot. Soon the lights in the hall went down, dimming as they might in a movie theater. George Newman, the CEO and founder of Xenosware, took the stage as a spotlight tracked him from the side to the center where the Void Runner sat. He was a man of roughly 50, graying-templed, a closely trimmed goatee and rimless spectacles. His face was well worn with laugh lines, and in both his composure and expression conveyed a warm sense of genuine enthusiasm for his work and the industry at large. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, speaking into the pencil-thin earpiece microphone he wore, "I am George Newman, founder of Xenosware, and I've come before you today because these are very exciting times in the worlds of not only gaming, but interactive technology as a whole. Since Pong first gave way to Mario up through modern titles such as Felonium 5, immersion has been the dream of game designers. Every new step we take in an effort, in a hope, to bring the player further into the fantasy worlds they take so much joy in inhabiting. With the advent of VR, we were able to take those experiences of adventure and escapism into an entirely new area, making what were once just representations of three-dimensional space into genuine 3D reality. But even there, something was missing. Today I am proud to announce that the introduction of the Xenosware Void Runner, that missing piece has been found. So, to give this new system a proper introduction, we've invited someone I'm sure you're all very familiar with. So please, give a warm welcome to Thrash," Newman said, turning and gesturing to Roderick, who quickly jotted up the stairs and into his own tracking spotlight. The light was blinding, making it impossible to see the crowds who cheered for him somewhere just behind the light. He lifted his hand and waved as he strolled over to Newman, who greeted him with a hearty handshake. After a moment, the applause died down, and Roderick looked to the small teleprompters which sat partially hidden just off stage in each direction. "Hello, Atlanta," he said, his voice amplified throughout the room. The crowd cheered again. "How's everyone doing?" Another wave of cheers came and went. So I wanted to say it is an absolute privilege to have been invited here today by George, and I'm really excited to see what he's got for us. So George, what is it we've got here? "Well, Thrash, this is our Void Runner system," Newman replied, smiling broadly. "I noticed there aren't any controllers, though. How's that work?" Roderick asked, sticking perfectly to the script. "I'm glad you asked. Instead of telling you, though, would you like to experience it for yourself?" Newman turned to the audience. "What do you say, folks? Do you want to see Thrash give it a try?" The crowd applauded their agreement, while both Roderick and Newman smiled. "Well, I guess that's a yes," Roderick said, still perfectly on script. Stepping closer to the display table, he gently lifted up the wireless VR helm and slipped it onto his head. Newman first pulled up a folding chair, guiding Roderick into it before he then nodded to a technician off stage who quickly activated the device. Roderick was not sure what to expect, but what happened next proved to be one of the most unique sensations and experiences of his life. It began with a tingle along his scalp, followed almost immediately by a pleasant warm sensation which quickly spread throughout the whole of his body. He gasped slightly as the feeling washed over him. As it did, he saw as the darkness within the headset was soon replaced by not merely an image, but an impossibly real and entirely borderless environment. He was standing, or rather floating, high in the clouds. The blue sky and bright sun shone above him, and the wind blew gently along. The wind was not seen, however, as much as felt as one would on any ordinary blustery day. To call the experience immersive would have been an understatement, as to Roderick in that moment, every nerve, every fiber of his very being felt entirely as though his flight through the skies was real, even down to him no longer even feeling the seat beneath his bottom. "How does it feel, Thrash?" Newman's voice asked from all around him. "Feels... definitely the word, George. Just... wow. It's not just realistic, it's... real," Roderick replied, his lips and mouth feeling the words as they left, and his ears hearing them, as though they were truly spoken out into the open air, before and all around him. "Let's try something else then. How about a nice drive through some beautiful mountains?" Newman said, gesturing again to the technician off stage. A moment later, Roderick felt his reality shift. No longer was he hovering weightlessly in the air, but was now seated in the driver's seat of a most incredible supercar. His hands gripped the wheel, and he could feel the fine leather upholstery which covered it. The scent and sight and sound of such luxury was accented by the fantastic speed with which Roderick drove along the winding and unfathomably beautiful mountain road that lay around him. To the audience watching, the experience was still far from hitting the mark, though impressive nonetheless. Upon a grand display screen which dominated the back wall of the stage behind Roderick and Newman, those in attendance were treated to a view of what Roderick saw and heard, but not what he felt, not what he smelled, nor the sensations of the powerful engine roaring, the cool breeze that wafted in through the open moonroof, the very experience of it. Seeing could be believing, but it was still but a shadow of what Roderick was experiencing. "Feel like a little combat, perhaps?" Newman said, once more gesturing to the tech. This time as the car and road and mountain all faded to silent black, with the sensation of nothingness itself tickling Roderick's brain, a new environment shifted into reality all about him. He was standing on a city street. He knew the street well, as he had traversed it countless times over countless hours of brutal gameplay. He was in the city of Felonium 5. Yet beyond being a merely familiar recreation of the video game world, this one was real and tangible. His footfalls upon the pavement, taken only in the game space of his mind and experience, and not obligating actual motion from his actual limbs, felt and sounded just as they would on any actual sidewalk one could traverse. The acrid city smells of exhaust fumes, garbage, and waste mixed with countless scents of cooking food wafting from restaurants nearby. The reality to it was almost overwhelming. Looking down, Roderick, Thrash, observed a pistol holstered on his belt. Looking about, he was almost uncertain if he ought to play his game his way, as the lucid vibrancy of the place felt so real that the same sense one would have in real life came into play. This was but for a moment, though, as the moment soon passed when a familiar face of a regular non-player character he would commonly find among his victims passed by. The face and body looked far more real than he was used to. Were it not for slight hints spanning the uncanny valley between authentic human and clear replica, as well as the character's language, Thrash may have easily mistaken him for a real person. "Hey!" he called out as the game character strolled by. Turning, the character looked at Thrash with almost unnervingly real eyes and spoke. "Slibahando, Fabriga, Fiddlebach, Buck, Marpeton." They're speaking absolute nonsense, Thrash. Roderick was actually rather relieved to hear the character speaking in the standard fake language of the game. This put his mind at ease and afforded him just the reminder he was in a game that he needed to draw his game pistol from its in-game holster and shoot the blabbering game character right in the head. The body crumpled to the ground, just as a real corpse would, and as it did, Roderick heard a thunderous applause and cheers from the crowd out in the real world beyond his sight. Wow. Just... wow. How do I... he began to ask, staying still somewhat on the prearranged script, but also in simple awe of the experience. "How do you quit the game? Simple. Reach up to the right side of the headset with your right hand," Newman instructed. Roderick did as he was told, and found the sensation of doing so quite odd. Throughout his seated gameplay, he hadn't needed to move a muscle in the real world, with all the motion and action being processed internally within his mind. But with this action, a weightier sense of his arm could be felt, and though his game hand hovered in front of his face, his meat space hand felt the side of the headset and a small round button. "Just give that a push," Newman said. As he did, the system slowly faded to darkness, and as it did, Roderick felt a strange sensation of returning to his body, almost a bit like waking up. With his senses returned to his corporeal body, he lifted the headset off and handed it to Newman, his eyes wide in astounded excitement. "How was it, Thrash?" "That was absolutely incredible. It's not even playing a game, it's living it. How does it work?" Roderick asked. Though this still all played to the script, he was, in that moment, genuinely awestruck and dreadfully curious as to how that happened. "No, I'm glad you asked. When creating the Void Runner, we at Xenosware spent countless hours studying and adapting neural interface technology so as to create a genuine experience, rather than just a mere game. It works by communicating directly with and stimulating your brain in a way that allows a controlled and organized feed of tactile information, allowing it to feel as real as anything else. And the most exciting part with this is the applications for this technology beyond gaming. With this, police, firefighters, EMTs, doctors, even soldiers, even mechanics, whatever it might be, this technology can offer the user the ability to get real hands-on experience without any risk at all," Newman boasted. He hadn't missed a beat, and had clearly rehearsed his speech rather thoroughly. The presentation continued, with Newman going over the technical specifications and new advancements. Roderick managed to play his part and recite his lines, throwing in an odd joke here and there, but all the while remained utterly stunned with what he had just experienced. So great was his awe that he barely noticed as the presentation ended. A moment later, after this realization had set in, he was again being escorted by the same petite staffer back down the hallway to the VIP lounge. Unable to find Troy right away, he opted to hit the hotel bar for a cocktail, where he sat, staring into space in utter amazement. The more he thought upon it, the more it seemed to even surpass reality itself for how real it felt. It was as if an extra dose of corporeality had been added while playing, leaving Roderick desperately wanting more. So enamored with the experience and so overcome by the thought of it, it wasn't until Troy slapped him on the back, snapping him out of his stupor. "Hey man, what's up?" he asked, taking a seat beside him. "Oh, just thinking about that Void Runner. Holy shit, that thing is amazing. I'd say it's like really being there, but it's not even like really being there as much as just actually being there, Roderick gushed. No shit. I'll have to try it. So, I don't know how long you've been sitting here, but the after party is about to start. Let's head on over and you can maybe try your luck with serendipity, Troy replied. Roderick looked at his phone and to his surprise found that he had in fact been sitting there for well over an hour. So lost in thought was he that he hadn't noticed the time pass, nor the ice in his drink slowly melt away. Finishing it in a single watered-down gulp, he paid his tab and followed Troy back towards the VIP lounge. Already a number of other streamers and industry professionals had begun to gather, most with either a treat from the bountiful snack trays that were found throughout the room, or with a small clear plastic cup in which all manner of drinks and cocktails were served by the on-site dry bar. The whole room murmured with the low, dull chatter as online personalities gland-handed with game executives, each hoping that the other would offer a boon to their respective careers. Though intently looking to find serendipity, he was first met by Newman, who made a beeline for him the moment he saw Thrash and a friend arrive. Though Troy was introduced and was afforded a handshake and a smile, it was clear Newman only seemed to care about speaking to Roderick. To Thrash. "So, you enjoyed that demo, huh?" he asked, his mind mentally salivating at the thought of how many units the company would likely move, provided Thrash gave them ample promotion via his channel that they were hoping for. "It was pretty incredible, yeah. I've never done or seen anything like it. I was just telling my friend here about it at the bar. How does it get in your head like that?" Thrash replied. "Would you believe me if I told you it both reads and writes your mind?" Newman answered with a sly grin. "Reads and writes?" "So, when you put the headset on, it automatically maps out your brain like a neural imaging device in a hospital. From there, it determines the most effective way to produce illusory stimuli directly into your frontal cortex and, well, you know what? It's really mostly just a lot of technical jargon, so let's just say it tricks your brain into sort of having a waking lucid dream that takes place in whatever the game you're playing is." Neither Roderick nor Troy really understood a word of what he'd said. They nodded along, pretending to get it, but between the three of them in conversation, none were deluded as to their continued ignorance. It was what Newman said next that both he and Roderick had actually been waiting for. "We'd like to give you one of the first Void Runners as a gift, if you're interested." Roderick's face split into a broad grin. "Absolutely. Thank you. I bet my audience will really dig the streams." "Excellent. I'll have one of my people get you a unit before you leave today," said Newman, now sharing Roderick's smile. "I suppose I could grab one too, could I?" Troy asked, in a rather sad attempt at shoehorning himself into the conversation. Newman paused and looked at them as though he had completely forgotten he was standing there. Sure. Who are you again?" "I'm Troy. I go by Bandersmash on Glitch," he replied proudly. Newman nodded and raised his eyebrows in that universally recognizable way which screamed he was unimpressed and disinterested. "That's fantastic. Nice to meet you. My channel isn't quite as big as Thrash's here, but in the last 6 months I've seen a lot of growth. I'd love to stream some Void Runner gaming. Maybe even co-op with Thrash." Troy's excitement was not as infectious as he'd hoped, but it did the trick, and Newman passively agreed to gift him as well. It was one of the applied perks of being a professional streamer, that provided you could get in the room, odds were good that you'd walk out with whatever the latest and greatest in gaming tech on offer was. "So anyway, Rod, do you mind if I call you Rod?" Newman asked, returning his attention to Roderick. utterly despised being called such, and would to most anyone else tell them so. But he let it slide and nodded. Great. So, Rod, I was thinking perhaps you might like to partner up with us for a few streams to really help show the world what we've got here. Sound good? Newman continued. Yeah, sounds great. I figure if nothing else, I'll take a day or two to get familiar with the system, and whenever you guys are ready, we can put together some contracts, he replied. Excellent. Well, I have a really great feeling about this. I'll let you boys enjoy the party, and Rod, we'll be in touch. Thank you, Mr. Newman, said Roderick. Nice to meet you, sir, Troy offered, again receiving a polite but clearly weak and disinterested smile and head nod. As Newman turned and walked off, Troy turned to Roderick. Damn, I don't think he liked me all that much. It's a numbers game. I wouldn't worry about it. This time next year, you'll probably be on par with where I'm at now, and then they'll warm up to you a bit more. Anyway, where's that sexy little mink serendipity? Roderick replied, scanning the room. From his perspective, as the day had gone so well thus far, with him even managing to avoid the meet and greet which he utterly despised, his odds of hooking up with her were probably pretty good. So you gonna dip your balls in her mouth? Troy chuckled, his immaturity as usual on full display. Fuck, dude, that's gross. And yes, I do hope to dip my balls in her mouth, Roderick replied. Well, there she is, bud, said Troy, gesturing across the room to where a gorgeous, statuesque knockout of a woman stood. She was tall, taller than Roderick, who at 5'6" wasn't any great feat. With her platinum blonde hair streaming down her back and shoulders, she had a look resembling Margot Robbie, or some other Hollywood dream girl, with bright blue eyes, ample breasts, and an impossibly slim waistline. Though not a game streamer typically, her fame was amplified 100-fold once she'd launched in every fan's account. Though he'd likely not say as much, Roderick was a regular patron and consumer of the lewd and provocative images and videos behind the paywall, and even regarded it as a better expense than even paying his mortgage. Strolling to the bar first, Roderick ordered 2 gin and tonics, knowing from having followed her long enough that such was Serendipity's go-to drink. Troy agreed to hang back, watching from afar. Once the libations were acquired, he zeroed in on his online dream girl and approached. Handing her the cocktail, she was surprised and slightly confused as Roderick inserted himself into what had been an ongoing conversation with her manager. Serendipity? So nice to finally have a chance to meet you. I'm Roderick, but I go by Thrash and Glitch. I assume you've heard of me? She looked at him with an expression that betrayed 2 things. Firstly, she already knew without a doubt what this short gamer was hoping for. It was something of a professional hazard for her, and on a rather regular basis she would lament how seemingly every lame approach sounded just the same. The second fact was she had heard of Thrash before through mutual online acquaintances, and none of it was particularly appealing. Yeah, hi, nice to meet you, I guess? She smiled, though it was easily one of the weakest smiles afforded to anyone in the history of uncomfortable social interactions. I've been a fan of yours for quite a while. I'll say you're actually a bit taller than I'd expected. That's great. Yeah, kind of tall, I guess, she replied, politely but unenthusiastically. Been enjoying the convention? Yeah, it's been great. Her eyes began scanning the room as though desperately looking for some form of escape from the inevitable. I got to introduce that new VR set. Taking one home tonight. Pretty excited. I was curious, though. Here it comes, she thought. What are you, Like, what are you up to afterwards? I was thinking maybe... I'm probably just gonna go to bed. Yeah, I've got, like, a really big day tomorrow, she said, cutting him off and speaking in uptalk, with her voice rising at the end in the hopes of sounding more sincere. Really, it's a bummer. I was going to see if... Well... Roderick leaned in close and whispered to her something that doesn't bear actual repeating. Her reaction, however, said enough, as her veneer of congeniality fell away, replaced by a look of utter disgust and contempt. To those nearby, if her angry eyes and flaring nostrils didn't say enough, the throwing of her gin and tonic, which she hadn't sipped at all, directly into the face of the short creep in front of her, said it all. Sparing him one final scornful glare, she turned on her heel and angrily strode away. Troy tried his best to contain his laughter, but approaching Roderick found it all but impossible. That didn't go well, he said, suppressing a chuckle as he handed a few bar napkins to his friend. Roderick wiped the booze away from his face and sneered upon noticing it had soaked his hoodie. No, fucking didn't. What'd you say to her? Doesn't matter. You know, I think I'm done for today. Fuck this noise. I'm heading home, Roderick said, a mix of anger and embarrassment swirling about in his mind. You sure you don't want to stay and maybe get shit-faced with that Korean Cosmocraft team? They're funny dudes, Troy suggested, shrugging. Roderick, again, was only halfway listening to his friend, as per usual, but in this mix of rejection and anger, he simply stormed off without saying a word. After cleaning himself off in the bathroom, Roderick decided it was time for an Irish goodbye, leaving without telling anyone short of the Xenosphere representative who sought him out to give him his Void Runner. At least, he reasoned, the day was not a total loss. Arriving home, he stewed and lingered on utterly embarrassing himself in front of Serendipity. Slipping out of his outfit and into an equally expensive yet blessedly cleaner set of sweats, he smiled to himself as his eyes fell onto the small box within which his new toy rested. The experience earlier in the day had been incredible, and he was more than eager to explore it further. Pulling it from the box, he first synced it to his computer, and was delighted by the near instantaneous software installation. Putting the helmet upon his head, he was again greeted with a warm, tingling sensation as the interface began communicating with his mind. Despite sitting in his gaming chair, Roderick felt as though he were floating in a void, without even a sense of gravity. He considered what this could mean for his streams, as were he to split screen or incorporate a shot of him while playing as he normally did, the shot would likely be rather boring, as it would just be he, seated with a headset on, not moving short of his lips as he offered his standard wit and commentary. It was a strange thing to think about. Being effectively paralyzed while gaming, short of the limited use of one's hands to activate and deactivate the headset, not a muscle would move in the meat space, while in the virtual world, every conceivable sensation was theoretically waiting. Quite naturally, Roderick knew without a doubt that the biggest likely use for this system would be porn, as all things media or technology related invariably tended to be. But while he knew he'd likely enjoy that on his own later on, at the moment, he was more interested in returning to his favorite game and game universe, Felonium. The game loaded with but a mere thought, though it required an update which took a few moments. Once finished, however, Roderick, Thrash, was standing once more upon the sidewalk, the massive city expanding all about him, with a greater realism and depth than he could ever have imagined previously. A light breeze crossed his face, carrying with it the very real sense of a major metro area. He could smell Chinese food cooking from the small hole in the wall which sat beside his in-game home where he would spawn. This inspired the novel idea of seeing what the experience of eating virtual food in such a rich sensory environment might be like, and Thrash was not disappointed. It was as though he could actually taste the MSG in the bowl of noodles he ordered from the non-player cook character. As with all NPCs in the game, this one spoke in the make-believe language that sounded vaguely like English without making any actual sense. Rather than subtitles, the meaning conveyed was more innately understood within the mind. Another curious aspect of this sensory extravaganza. Throughout his life, he had on occasion gotten to experience lucid dreaming, wherein though asleep one is able to be cognizant of and in control of one's dreams. This was a great deal like that, yet stunningly more real than any dream could be. Strolling down the sidewalk, he nearly forgot he was in a game at all, until the sound of gunfire erupted down the street. NPC bank robbers were in a shootout with NPC cops, and the claps and snaps of the gunfire were almost loud enough to make Thrash's ears ring. Remembering then his own favorite in-game pastimes, he reached down to find a pistol holstered on his hip, and drawing the weapon, he took aim and fired both the police and the robbers, killing them off in short order. The blood which spattered along the make-believe pavement was a rich crimson. Dropped on the ground, several pistols and stacks of cash were ripe for the pickings. Once he'd taken his newly acquired loot, he reached instinctively over his shoulder, drawing from this air an assault rifle. The weight and tactile feel of the weapon, which had materialized out of nowhere, was so entirely real and convincing, at least as far as Thrash could tell, having never actually held such a rifle in real life. Taking aim at random pedestrians, he fired, over and over again, the realistic-looking background characters all shouting and screaming in their made-up language before falling to the ground dead. The recoil Thrash felt against his shoulder, and concussive blast from the rounds as they were fired was, as realistic as it was, exactly how he had always imagined it would be. Round after round he sent down the sidewalks, taking down one NPC after another. His in-game wanted levels skyrocketed as he looked upward into the corner of his vision, seeing the standard in-game heads-up display phase into view upon his desire to see it. Following a bloody gun battle with the police, during which Thrash lobbed grenades and Molotov cocktails, exploding the approaching police cars and torching those officers whom he had not blown up into mists of blood and viscera. A rocket launcher was next, blowing up the oncoming SWAT team bus before it even had a chance to turn the corner onto the street which had become his bloodied playground. Climbing into a nearby parked car after smashing out its window, he was pleased to find the key within it, reasoning that must be the standard mechanic for starting vehicles, as opposed to hot wiring, which Thrash did not know how to do. Taking off, he managed to drive at top speed before jumping the car off of an overpass down onto a freeway below, but misjudged his speed and angle, sadly crashing the nose of the car into the concrete and exploding. It didn't hurt, though as unexpected as it was a somewhat jarring experience. Everything went black for just a moment before the world resolved itself once more, he finding himself stood once again in front of his in-game home upon the sidewalk. Though some remnants of his most recent mayhem still littered the streets, such as blood stains and the burning wreckage of police vehicles, most of such had seemingly been already deleted, as was normal in this game. Deciding to experiment with his more dark delights, the very sort of torture and gore porn his audience looked for, he turned and made his way into the in-game home. Sure enough, in its basement, all manner of tools and instruments of excruciating horror hung along the walls, with both a vertical rack and a horizontal metal table upon which the victims were to be tied. Slipping back upstairs and out of the house, he reached blindly over his shoulder and produced a length of rope, again manifesting it out of nowhere. Walking towards him, oblivious to what was about to happen, a male NPC, blabbering its fake language, approached. Knocking it on the back of the head as it passed with his pistol, he quickly set about tying the non-person up and foisting them onto his shoulder. Thankfully, though striving for as much realism as possible in the system, he found the character quite light and very easy to carry. Once back downstairs, he set to work tying and chaining the character to the upright rack. Above its head, a trail of the letter Z floated upwards, denoting its ongoing unconsciousness. Slapping it in the face, the letters disappeared as the character opened its eyes. Thrash hadn't yet studied the NPCs up close too thoroughly and was actually somewhat relieved to notice that though realistic looking to a certain extent, the uncanny valley actually worked in his favor, as enacting such sadism as he was planning to upon a true dead ringer of an actual human being might be a bridge too far, even for him. The NPC struggled and called out, all rather procedurally, sticking to a defined pattern as was normal in the game. This too Thrash appreciated, as it served as a regular and ongoing reminder that this was indeed just a game. "Slick Goroff! Goroff, slick form! Slick form!" the NPC cried out, shaking its head. "Yeah, slick Goroff, woom, and all that," Thrash replied, as he approached the struggling character with a large pair of shears in his hand. Thrash studied his prey some more, noticing that it looked quite a bit like the facial features, such as the nose, mouth, and eyes, could all possibly be cut out or removed, a noted improvement over the previous standard VR experience. Thrash proceeded to test this by using the shears to remove the NPC's left ear. The cut was smooth, and in a moment, the ear itself fell to the floor below with a wet smacking sound. This was followed up with the other ear, then fingers, as Thrash snipped and cut the NPC slowly to pieces. It writhed, screamed in its made-up language, and continued shaking its head as a no while Thrash carried on. Part of him started to become slightly worried that he could revel in such visceral and realistic carnage, concerned that perhaps he was in fact some sort of psychopath. But then, continuing his bloody and disgusting work, reminded himself it was merely a game. No different than it had been the day before, aside from the immersion, naturally. Soon, he had stripped the NPC of all of its fingers, most of its facial features, and both of its ears. It continued wiggling, muttering nonsense protests as he did. Pressing a large hunting knife slowly into its chest, Thrash paused, after feeling the very real sensation of pushing the blade both into flesh as well as through very convincing ribs. The character continued struggling, and as Thrash stepped back and looked upon the bloodied mess of a human form with a large knife protruding from its torso, found the writhing and slow death somewhat revolting. Though his audience would likely enjoy this more advanced gameplay, even they had their limits. Deciding to put the thing out of its make-believe misery, Thrash reached once more into the invisible inventory over his shoulder, summoning a large shotgun, which he immediately put to use, dispatching his digital victim. Again, the kickback and concussive force of the shot shook him, as the shotgun managed to make the NPC's head explode in a mess of blood, brain, and skull. Perhaps excessively gory by even his standards, he observed as the separated tongue that had been within the mouth fell and splattered upon the hard concrete as the ears had done before. The headless body dropped limply on the rack. Thrash was both disappointed and relieved that no animations had been added for the corpse to begin shaking, as he'd seen in a fair number of online snuff films, as though while such would add even more realism to the already very real feeling experience, such would probably prove a bit gross even for he. His sadism within such games was itself even too moderate for that. However, now he realized it was time to test out the reset feature by leaving the room and returning. Walking up the stairs to the main floor of the small house, he closed the door behind him and paced in the kitchen area, counting to 30. Once his count was complete, he returned to the killing room downstairs to find it had all reset perfectly, with each of the tools and instruments he'd used shining clean and bright along the shelves and workbench they'd come from. The corpse was gone. The viscera and blood and errant body parts were gone. The place had reset itself perfectly. He was relatively certain it would, but was glad to see the confirmation as viscera cleanup detail, while in fact its own game was not something he would wish to play in such a world as this. He returned to the city street out front and began scrolling on his in-game smartphone until deciding to select an actual game mission. It was a simple, low-level beginner's job, the robbing of a gas station and a successful getaway. He found a convenience store required nearby, held a large revolver in the face of the terrified clerk character who chattered desperately in his fake language, before handing the bundle of game money over to Thrash, who promptly shot him anyway. Blood and brain matter sprayed the cigarette display behind him as the corpse slumped behind the register. Thrash took note that he had actually gotten hit with some of the spray, and paused a moment to appreciate that more minute detail. Soon the police were on him, and as Thrash threw a Molotov cocktail at the gas pumps engulfing 2 NPC police in flames, he then dashed into a nearby car, again, found the keys at the ready and took off. He hadn't made it far when a police helicopter overhead overtook him. The sniper in the side door took aim and, be it through a high level of difficulty in the game or just dumb luck, the round smashed through the windshield and into Thrash's chest. It didn't hurt as much as tickled in a strange and slightly annoying way. Trying his best to shoot back from the driver's seat, Thrash lost control of the car, sending it careening into a lamppost. Once more, while the impact itself didn't hurt, it tingled curiously, as did the barrage of gunfire that came next from the police, effectively killing Thrash in-game. The world went dark. Then, light once more, with Thrash once more standing outside of his in-game house. He again withdrew his phone, only this time to see a text message. It was from Troy. It read simply, "Turn around." As he did, Thrash nearly jumped out of his shoes to see Troy standing directly behind him, grinning wildly. "Dude, what the fuck? You scared the shit out of me," Thrash said, as Bandersnatch chuckled. "I know. I guess it's just how you spawn in the game. I noticed you weren't streaming." "Why not?" he replied. Well, I figured I'd give the game a test run before doing any live shit," Thrash said casually. "Well, I just got home and got this thing set up just a little bit ago. It's fucking wild, yeah? Got to hang out with Newman and some of the developers after you bailed. Nice guys. So how about 1v1, Troy said, before getting a quick jump on Thrash, drawing a submachine gun from his invisible inventory and dumping a full magazine into his friend who stood before him. Since Thrash's health and armor had restored during his respawn, the mag dump didn't kill him outright, though he noticed, curiously, that the sensation of being shot like that was notably different than it had been against the NPCs. The shots almost hurt. Thrash tried to wave his hands and shout at Troy to stop, but between the joy in his face and the noise of the weapon, he failed to communicate this correctly, leaving him with no other option but to return fire. A blast from a heavy machine gun pockmarked Troy's chest and torso with bloody gunshots, though Troy merely laughed with each hit as his health bar dropped lower. He couldn't put his finger on it, but somehow this was strange. Something was different now. The previously ticklish sensations of taking damage seemed to be growing more intense, at least for him. Troy clearly was immune to the growing discomfort and slight pangs of genuine pain that came as he shot his friend and carried on. Thrash couldn't explain it, but a foreboding feeling overtook him. "Check this out," Troy said, as he closed the short distance that had grown between the two during their exchanges of gunfire. He held a large knife in his hands and grinned wildly as he plunged the blade into Thrash's stomach. The pain was excruciating. He had never been stabbed in life, but was very certain that this is what it felt like. His eyes went wide, and looking to Troy, who still grinned maniacally, attempted to speak. "Sklidu, Kasatrak, Flidopo, Flidopo?" Despite his intense desire to tell him to stop, his words simply would not come out correctly. He spoke now as the non-player characters, despite his meaning and intent being solidly in the front of his mind. Troy stopped, still gripping the knife as it remained buried in Thrash's chest. Looking to his friend, he was confused suddenly, as the sight of Thrash's eyes gave him pause. They were the large, cow-like eyes of an NPC. The language was the same. "What the fuck? Did you get booted? Fucking buggy early release bullshit. Thrash! What the fuck?" he called out, looking around as though screaming into the aether would somehow function like a direct message or phone call. Thrash struggled some more, his vision swimming as the blood poured from the wound as Troy removed the knife. Troy was clearly utterly baffled as to what was going on, and as Thrash fell to his knees clutching at his wound, he tried desperately to tell Troy something was very, very wrong. But he couldn't. All that came out of his mouth when he attempted to speak were the nonsensical randomness spoken by the digital denizens of the Felonium 5 city. "Clacko! Sophie Splunk! Clacko! Clacko! Boof!" It was of no use. He tried desperately to grip at the headset button in his real life, the motor control when in-game being limited to just that, but all he seemed to do was touch and grab the side of his in-game head. It wasn't working. He couldn't get out. Troy stood in his place, still bewildered. He pulled the in-game smartphone from his pocket and attempted to send a call to Thrash. The tone of it connecting rang and rang and rang until finally disconnecting after some minutes. He looked down at the NPC bleeding out on the ground. He was sure Thrash had just been kicked or something, as such were common with early release titles that hadn't had the bugs all worked out. Looking, though, at the in-game visage, the NPC version of his friend, he suddenly had a grand idea. Across the country and across the globe that night, as with most nights, thousands of people turned on their computers, laptops, tablets, smart TVs, and smartphones, logging into their glitch accounts and settling in to watch their favorite streamers. Troy, known online as Bandersmash, had just begun his nightly game stream, sending out his notification with an excited string of all-caps letters announcing that he would apparently be the first to stream using the Xenosware Void Runner, playing the fantastic, though admittedly buggy game, Felonium 5. In addition to this, though, he also promised one hell of a surprise. "What's up, Smashers? It's your boy Bandersmash. I just got home a little bit ago from AVR, and you'll never guess what I got. That's right, the Void Runner. Let me tell you, this thing is awesome," Troy said, introducing his stream. The audience watched along, seeing the game world from Troy's perspective, and at the moment, he was standing in what looked like a basement, his eyes perusing the variety of tools, medical, and gardening equipment, and other assorted sharp and pointy things upon a workbench. Troy continued. It takes the virtual out of virtual reality because, oh boy, this gameplay is scary good. And now, I don't know if this is a thing when a player who leaves the game or gets kicked just turns into one, or if the guy's a pariah, put him in here, but check this out. Turning, he and the audience were able to then see his surprise. There, strapped upon the large vertical rack with its hands and feet shackled, a digital game character, one who looked remarkably like Glitch Star Thrash, was chained up and bleeding from the abdomen. Having fallen somewhere in the uncanny valley, Troy and his viewers were astounded as they studied the detail to the character. It looks just like him, right? He said. We were playing together earlier and I think he got booted. I tried sending him a DM, but for all I know, he just got drunk and fell asleep or something. Anyway, in honor of me beating Thrash to the punch to be the first to stream this, let's give this little doppelganger here the sort of welcome he's famous for. Troy turned back to the workbench, taking up a power drill. Roderick, Thrash, tried to scream, but all that came out was the inane babble of his new form. Troy, unimaginative as he was, took the quick route by drilling into the NPC's head. As the grinding and the searing pain he felt washed over him, Roderick was relieved when it all went black at last. Hoping it was a mere glitch or bug in the system, he expected to hoped to respawn as himself, so as to give his friend the business. And yet as the dark gave way to light, he noticed, to his horror, that he had neither the in-game phone, inventory, or any of the standard kit a player gets. He tried to speak again, but once more, only nonsensical babble came out. He also had not respawned in his usual location, instead seeming to have been randomly deposited somewhere on the map. He tried again in vain to remove his headset, but for whatever reason, it wouldn't work. He was stuck as an NPC. As he strolled down the sidewalk, his head spinning and genuine panic washing over him, he began noticing other NPCs that would walk by seemed to be staring at him. As he continued along his way, more stared, with many simply stopping dead in their tracks, glaring at him. He tried to break out on a run, but found his way blocked by a gathering cluster of the non-player characters. One who stood in the middle of their small group approached. Flizip, boop kamango, Thrash, it said, staring him coldly in the eyes. The language was still nonsense, yet for some reason, almost as though translated, Roderick could sense the meaning. They were real words, saying in a cold and dispassionate tone, "Welcome to the game, Thrash." Before he could respond, or even think about it, a car sped by with a name glowing above it. The name was Sly Guy, and below it, a health bar and armor meter could be seen. Roderick didn't have much time to process what he was seeing, as a moment later a massive explosion ripped through the small crowd of pedestrians, blowing limbs off and killing countless NPCs. Roderick felt the heat of the blast and the shocking cold and pain that shot through him as his arms and legs and head separated from his body. Feeling utterly excruciating, the sweet relief of death was punctuated by the automatic respawn. There was, as far as he could tell, no escape. Police would find the body of Roderick Smalls some weeks later during a wellness check called in by his friends. His slowly decaying corpse was found sat upright in his gaming chair at his desk. Upon his head was the Void Runner, still running despite its user being indeed very dead. The authorities, after removing the body, shut down his technology for good then. Within the expansive city of Felonium 5, though, a terrified and bewildered consciousness that used to be known as Roderick was stalked, assaulted, tortured, and killed over and over and over again. At one point, he noticed it was not always players who would set him aflame, abduct him for dissection, or torture, or shoot, or blow him up, but often, violence came about by the countless numbers of other non-player characters, all of whom seemed to constantly glare at him, if they were not outright attacking him. Troy held a small funeral in the game for his friend. His loss made him sad, and as such, he'd often seek out the Thrash NPC, who was perpetually incapable of speaking with him. On some days he'd simply sit and talk with the soulless avatar of his old friend. On others, he would sometimes engage in a gunfight with him, one-sided as they always were, partly hoping in some strange way that maybe someday his friend might fire back. But that day would never come, and Roderick, Thrash, so long as the game existed, would never and could never truly die. To finally play a game on God mode, the absolute worst of all cheats.
Chilling tales for dark nights.